Welcome to another episode of Make Mental Health Matter. And our theme on Wednesdays is Warrior Wednesdays. I know the last couple weeks I have been riding solo and kind of kicking off this new hour that we're doing with Make Mental Health Matter. But I do have a guest today, which I am really excited, and I alluded to bringing him on this last Monday. But first and foremost, if this is your first time watching, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you mash down that subscribe button so that you don't miss another episode, or wherever you're watching or listening, make sure you follow us, because I promise you every single guest that I've had since 2021 has been incredible, and they tend to topple over each other, which I think is just really amazing and awesome. So again, we have this show, which is Make Mental Health Matter. I do them on Mondays at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time with the theme of Mental Health Mondays, where we talk to guests who are either professionals or advocates for mental health, or those that live with or experience a mental health challenge. And then we have our Wednesday evenings, which is our Warrior Wednesday. And we really showcase the strength and courage of people that have gone through experiences and share their stories, because you never know when you hear a story and it may be something that saves your life or touches you in a different way, that you can ultimately go into that place of hope. So that's really the whole goal of Warrior Wednesdays. And without further ado, I am going to bring up my guest, Aaron Stark. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your story.
Well, my name is Aaron Stark. Today, I am a father of four. I work at full-time at a gas station. I'm a public speaker and advocate. And when I was a teen, I was almost a school shooter.
Wow. Yeah, so there's a lot there, which we will definitely unpack. So tell me a little bit. Actually, tell the audience how you and I met. We it happened to be on LinkedIn. There was an event that I ended up doing that was called You Are Not Alone, and you had posted your TEDx event or your TEDx talk, and I clicked on it, and because one, we're both in Colorado, and two, it just sounded really interesting. So I ultimately watched that originally and reached out to you via LinkedIn and started a conversation. And so your story, I know that you and I met, and you told me a lot more of the background, which has been just eye-opening, at least for me, in the mental health space and just in general. So I am super excited for you to share a little bit more about that story too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's been great meeting you and talking with you, and I hope to do more. So I grew up in a really dark, violent, and aggressive family. My birth father, I describe living with him like as living in a Stephen King movie. It was the most violent and aggressive and abusive, every kind of abuse you can think of, kind of situation. Just extreme violence. The earliest memories of the most depraved and violent things you can imagine. And the first 5 years of my life was like that. And during that time living with my mom, she was kind of like the mom from Terminator 2, very survivalistic, very much protect the kids. We would run away from my violent father. But then when she escaped him, she got with my stepdad, and it shifted from a Stephen King movie to Scarface, where it was crack cocaine and crime and violence and lying constantly. And we became a very nomadic criminal family. We moved around a lot. We were either getting evicted, or social workers were investigating, or the police were investigating, or whatever it was. I never stayed at a school longer than 6 months. I was constantly the new kid, bouncing from state to state, usually between Oregon and Colorado. And along that time, I developed a really toxic self-image of myself. I was dirty and fat and smelly. And early on in life, it's right around the age of reason, 10, 11 years old, I really decided that I was the dirty, fat, smelly one, and I was the worthless one, and I was the one that didn't matter. And so as I grew older, that opinion really took hold, and it really kind of shaped who I became. and I describe it, wrapped that darkness around me like a blanket. I used it like a shield to protect me away against people. It was like a spiky, toxic, like I became mean, and I started insulting people, and I was dirty, and I made myself physically unappealing. And at first it was just after the effects of my family. But as I grew into teen years, that really became like a conscious effort. I decided that was the way to keep people away. If I was nasty, they would stay away from me, and if they were away from me, they couldn't hurt me. And so that became a really protective measure for me. And the same time that that was happening at school, where I was becoming really nasty and dirty and filthy, and I was always the new kid, so I would have a whole different set of bullies every school I went to. And I ended up going to 30 or 40 different schools throughout my entire school career. So many I lost count. And but at home, the toxic abuse and drug abuse and just rampant destruction in the home life just really got out of control, and it just continued to spiral and spiral. Watching my parents dig through the carpet for crack rock in front of me, and they were the kind of parents that didn't want to hide anything from the kids, so they would just pull out the electric skillet and rock up crack right in front of us and just sell it. And it was I saw multiple of my family members try to commit suicide, lots and lots of beatings and violence. And I was now becoming 13, 14 years old, and I'm starting to grow into myself. I'm starting to get bigger, starting to get stronger. But the abuse at home just continues to escalate and escalate. And I would have to get involved in physical fights between my mom and my stepdad and pull him off of her, and then she would attack me for getting involved with it, and just total chaos. And so around 13 years old, I ended up leaving home. I ended up becoming homeless. I just couldn't take it anymore and started bouncing around from friend's house to friend's house and living in the streets. And I developed a group of what I call disaster groupies. They were kids who were lived around me during that time, that they didn't have anything like me in their world, but they kind of wanted to live vicariously through my darkness. They wanted to, like, we would hang out and talk, and instead of hanging out when talking about girls and sports and normal conversations, we would talk about killing people. We would say, if you were going to shoot up a school, what would you do? If you're going to kill 10 people, how would you do it? And it was just like the fiction of the group. And looking back, there was a bunch of depressed kids trying to navigate depression without any adult supervision. But that's the life that we were. It was pre-internet time, and that was the way it was. It was a bunch of kids just sitting around being in the dark. But the thing was, the other kids in that group got to go home. They got to go home to their family and got to leave the group, and it was just kind of activity for them. I got to go home and go to the park, go to the field, and sleep in the field, or sleep in a shed. And that for lack of a better term, that hell just continued to get worse and worse and worse. And along that way, I met the one actual friend I had. His name was Mike, and he lived at the opposite end of a block that I had one day at one house we were at when I was 12. He was 10. We bonded and met over comic books. We made fast friends over comic books. Oh, the whole time I was moving back and forth, superhero comic books was my one lifeline. The comic books and specifically Marvel comics, that was my big thing. And this was before the age of the Marvel universe. Like, comic books were not nearly what they are these days. It wasn't cool. You got made fun of. You got picked on. But that was my escape. And when we moved from place to place, when I would have someone burst into the room at 4 o'clock in the morning with a duffel bag saying, "Here, you got 5 minutes to grab everything. We need to get out of here." The one thing I would ever grab was my comics. I'd just take crates of them and take them, ship them across the country with me. And so Mike and I bonded early on over superhero comic books. And that became superheroes and deep conversation. And he became my one actual friend. And in early teen years, I would go spend weeks at his house and go spend the time over there and be really good. And then, but that as this toxic age got into it, and as it became more and more toxic at home, more and more toxic with everybody else, I wasn't able to sleep in his house anymore because his parents wouldn't let me. I was too filthy and too much of a bad influence. But Mike would still let me still let me sleep in his shed. He would sneak me into his tool shed behind his house, and sometimes he would sneak me out dinner, and that became kind of my home base. And right around 14 years old, I also took to self harm. I started cutting. It was regulatory action, I think, looking back, that when I was living in this like tsunami of pain, just like sloshing back and forth. I didn't really have any control or agency over anything. I didn't have any control over where I lived or what was going on at home or any of that. I was only barely 13, 14 years old. And for some reason, self harm became like the one thing that was mine. It was the one, the one thing that was real, that was controllable by me. And even though it was really dark and destructive, it was the only thing I had. And I started spiraling into that pretty bad. And so I ended up, all of this kind of comes to a head where I end up in the middle of the night in the shed behind Mike's house. And the shed, to set the scene, has got wood slats on the roof with like gaps in the slats. You can see the rain coming down. And I'm in this big gray puffy recliner chair that his parents had in storage. And this big, hang on once. Sorry. I had this big gray puffy recliner chair that his parents had in storage. And I was sitting there, I was cutting myself so bad that a giant pool of blood was forming underneath me. And I thought to myself, I have to get myself some help. I'm gonna die. I have to do something or I'm gonna die. And so the next morning, I went to Mike's back door and knocked on his door and asked his mom for bus fare and a phone book. And I called social services on myself, because over the years, social services have been one of the reasons why we moved. Their investigation has been one of the many reasons why we why we left. I thought maybe they could be some help. So I called them on myself and set an appointment for that afternoon. And it was dawn when I called. And by the time I got there, they didn't just bring me in, they also had brought my mom in. And my mom was the most practiced liar I've ever known. We not only got evicted from 30 or 40 houses, but we also moved into 30 or 40 different houses. And we always managed to have a place to stay, because it was pre-internet days. So there wasn't all the networking. People couldn't check up in 30 seconds. You could move to another state and make up a whole new identity and become a different person. And so she got them to believe that I was making it all up, that I was just doing it for attention. And they sent me home with her. And when they sent me home with her, we drove away. She got like a couple blocks away from this place. She turned to me and she snarled with this mean look on her face. She said, "Next time you should do a better job and I'll buy you the razor blades." And I was like, okay, you think I'm a monster? All right. And that darkness I wrapped around me like a blanket before, I dove headlong into it. I just dove right in. Like, you think I'm a monster? I'm going to show you what a monster is now. And for the next 9 months, I went on what I call scorched earth, where I went and was purposefully being as toxic as possible to every possible positive spot in my life. If you were nice to me, I was going to figure out how to offend you. It's specifically what offended you, and do that. I was going to lie and steal and ruin every relationship I could. And in this time, I charmed and snuck my way into my family members' houses, got into their photo albums, gathered every picture of me, and burned them. Put every picture of me in a giant pile and burned it. So currently there's only maybe 6 pictures of me that exist before the age of 15. And so after about 9 months of that, of complete scorched earth, even ruining my relationship with Mike, I thought, where I went and stole a whole bunch of his stuff. And I thought I was being the monster I thought I was. And after 9 months of that, I'm now completely alone. And I'm in the field that's behind the restaurant Casa Bonita. If you guys ever watched the show South Park, there's a restaurant here in Denver, Casa Bonita. It's that restaurant that they did an episode on. It's the field behind that restaurant. And fun fact, that episode, that's accurate. Anybody that's been to Casa Bonita knows that's really the way it was. So watch that. That's really what it was like. But I was in the field behind that restaurant, and I was at the very bottom. And I hadn't taken my shoes off in like 3 weeks, but I wasn't wearing socks. My feet were like rotting off my body. I hadn't changed clothes in forever. I was surviving off of free samples that I would take from the grocery store in the strip mall, and trying to avoid the police. And I woke up one morning and it was snowing, and it was so cold that my walk to the up the hill to the strip mall, I wasn't just shivering. I was like shivering. Like I was shaking and twitching. I could barely move, could barely breathe. Made it into the bathroom there to wash myself up. And I thought I have to do something. I'm gonna die. If I do this one more night, I'm gonna die. And so across the street from the school that I was nominally at, because I had to be at school during the daytime because truancy officers would arrest you. Mind you, I was only 16 years old. And so if I wasn't at the school, then the cops would arrest me, take me in for a day for truancy. So I didn't want to do that. So I'd be at the school. And across the street from the school that I was at, there was a sign that said mental health. And I didn't know what it was for. I didn't know what it was about, but I knew it said mental health. And so I know that last time I warned them I was coming, and I'm not doing that again because that was the most toxic thing that ever happened to me. So I'm just coming to go in cold. So I go in, and it was a treatment center. They had me see a young lady, and she was in her early mid-20s maybe. And I don't really remember much about that conversation because all I remember is the end, where she said, "I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. I can't help you." And as I walked out of that door, it was late at night. It was like late enough to be dark. And my brain broke. I felt my brain snap like a mirror. And I found out what was under that giant tsunami. When you go all the way down to the bottom, it gets really quiet and it gets really still because there's nothing left to lose. There's nothing left to care about. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to cut my arm off? I'm going to die. You're going to put me in jail? You're going to feed me. Like, I don't have any more down. And right then, all my plans crystallized. Everything popped into my brain in full focus. That I knew exactly what I was going to do. All those talks about what with the disaster groupie friends, I knew exactly the plans that I was going to have. I was either going to go to the mall food court or the school food court and cause as much damage as possible and die by doing it. And it's important to note that neither one of these sites were what we consider soft targets. Both sites had the school had uniformed armed police officers in it at all times. And the mall literally has a police station a couple doors down from the food court. My plan was to kill as many people as I could and die by suicide by cop. But my actual victims weren't going to be the people that I attacked. My actual victims were going to be my parents. I wanted to make my parents deal with creating a monster. So the people I attacked were going to be the damage that I caused to create that attack. And so I knew what I was going to do. And I knew where to get a gun because this was mid-90s. Gangs were all over the place. And there were gangbangers that hung out next to the ROTC building. And they bought and sold drugs for my family. And so they knew I wasn't a narc or anything like that. So I went to them like, hey, people with flash guns in schools all the time. It's like Boys in the Hood era. And so I went to him like, hey, can you get me a gun? Hopefully one that shoots a lot of bullets. He's like, yeah, sure. Give me an ounce of weed. And that was the easiest part. I just went to my mom's house, and my brother had a druggy friend sleeping on her floor, and I just stole an ounce out of his pocket, took it to the guy. I'm like, here you go. He's like, all right, give me 3 days. And so it was set. And my plan was the instant I got the gun, I was going to go do the attack. There wasn't going to be any waiting time. And the only difference in the attack was going to be the time of day I got the weapon. Daytime, go to school. Nighttime, go to the mall. And so in that 3 days time, I didn't think I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but looking back, I think I was saying goodbye. I was going in a much more positive way, not positive, but peaceful way, and talking to people and like closing off relationships. No aggression, no animosity, just like giving away my comic books and giving away any personal belongings and saying how I really feel to people. And like in a peaceful way, like what I really feel, how I really loved some people. And along that way, I went to Mike's house. And Mike opened the door and saw me. And Mike knew the hell I was living in. The whole time we were friends, I talked about spending weeks at his house. He never once came to my house. Never spent the night at my house, because the one time he did come to my house, he saw the crackheads digging through rocks on the floor, and he saw the druggies sleeping in the bathroom, and he didn't ever come over again. So he knew it was him that I was crying to after my mom told me I should have done a better job. It was his shed that I was sleeping in, and he brought me in, and he didn't know what I had planned. He still didn't know what I had planned until I came out with my story in 2018. But he saw me, and he kept on telling me, "You're a good kid in a crap world." Luda would tell me, "You're a good kid in a crap world," and he didn't say that word. He said a different word, but I'll make it polite. And it wasn't just hanging out with a friend, because we sat down, we had watched a movie, he made me some food, gave me a shower. He was giving me back the tiny granular bits of humanity to set me back on the bottom shelf of life. Like, I had fallen completely off the cliff of existence. When I knocked on his door, I thought that I was a walking ball of nothing, ready to explode and destroy the world. Like, I would walk around to my friends at that time, or friends, people I knew, whoever I was around, and be like, "Do you remember me if I leave the room? When I walk away, do you know if I'm here?" And I thought I was a nothing. I thought I was a void. Like, the person in me had been boiled away, and all that was left was this ball of destruction that was ready to blow up and burn the world down. And when Mike brought me in, it was like pushing the waves back onto humanity, like rolling the clock back on my personhood, and it like set my feet back down, and it was the most cathartic thing. I never left his house for 3 days, and I actually ended up staying there a whole week. And he showed me I could be a person, and but it's important to note that it's not like it was a magic thing. It's not like, ding, everything's happy, everything's better. The reality is different, and everything's happy. He saved my life, and everything was great after that. Nope, that's not the story. The reality of it is that while it was like the clock rolled back on me, so the trauma bubble had come up and almost burst, and he was able to recede that, and so I ended up feeling very remorseful, very ashamed, and sad and about what I had planned. And but I was still living in the same hell. I was still living in the same, my family was still the same, all that chaos was still the same, the abuse was still the same, all that was still the way it was. But he did help me manage to like shift my living situation a bit. So I was able to get a little bit of a different environment so I could kind of reset. And having that reset really did push it back a while. But now we're going to fast forward now to my 19th birthday. Okay. So night of my 19th birthday, I am now suicidal. The depression has grown greatly again. The abuse is still, the chaos at home hasn't changed. It's just gotten worse. Crack is still everywhere. And I am now planning on killing myself because I didn't want to hurt anybody else anymore. I just wanted to end my own life. And I was trying to act that day like nothing was wrong. Since I had interventions in the past, I had people talk to me before. I just wanted to act like nothing was happening in my life. It was different. I want to have as good a day as possible, and then go back specifically to that field behind Casa Bonita and end my life. And I had gotten a hold of a whole bunch of drugs, gotten a bag of cocaine from my mom, got a whole bunch of pills. She was a walking medicine cabinet, a whole bunch of pills, and bought a whole bunch of LSD off the street. Way more drugs than were needed to do the job. And I was planning on going to the field and committing suicide. But the day, like I said, I was acting like everything was normal. I wanted to have as good a day as possible. So I went to Mike's house. And Mike is a very friendly person. Okay, Mike has a friend group of his own, and one of his friends is this girl named Amber. And Amber was always really nice to me. She was never mean to me, but she was definitely his friend. She was like his contact. But she was a cool person. And so he was like, "Hey, we're going to go kick it at Amber's today." And I'm thinking, hey, that's great. That's a great last day. I'm going to spend it with two of my favorite people, maybe watch a good movie, listen to some good music, and then go back to the field and end my life. And when we get there, that wasn't what it is at all. It was actually a surprise birthday party for me. And I walked into about 14 people saying happy birthday, and Amber baked me a blueberry peach pie, and I walked past her and walked to the bathroom and dropped all my drugs in the toilet. And that was the last time I ever tried to kill myself. And both Amber and Mike are both my best friends to this day. I just recently went and saw a concert with Amber the other day, and planning on going to another one with Mike in 2 weeks.
That's awesome. So I want to jump into a couple things that you said, but first we're going to take a quick commercial break and then we'll be right back. And like that, we're back. So I know the first time you and I ever talked and you shared your story, I mean, as I was following along on this journey that you just so graciously told all of us and all the audience, there were so many pieces of it that, not that I fully identify with what you went through by any means, but
Mhm.
I also noticed that there's a lot of other kids' stories potentially, right? That my brain goes to, if we think about the pandemic and they were saying you're safer at home, like that's one thing that I'm like, no, not everybody is. The other thing is self-harm. I was a cutter myself also, not really sure. I know it was a learned behavior from my side, but it was more that release. And I think a lot of people have the misunderstanding about self-harm. It's one way to release, but you knew you got to this point that you needed help and you tried. Like that was the biggest thing, that when you told me your story, you tried multiple times and nobody helped you. Like it broke my heart when I heard you say that. And I know that you were living in this hell and the situation just got worse and worse and worse. You tried to get out of it and nobody was willing to help multiple times.
Mhm.
And that to me just 100% broke my heart. Knowing, I mean, I know back in the day, right? Like we didn't have access to as much as we have now, but also, and the technology wasn't there, but it's still not that matters. It's just when people need help and they aren't able to get help. And then on top of it, the school districts and the, like CPS and all of them,
Well,
they didn't do their job.
and I think there's another aspect that I usually don't have time to talk about in the story, but I'm going to briefly mention it really quick here. That so my parents also built into me, one of the reasons why reaching out for help and being refused was so traumatic and such flashbulb moments for me, was because to reach out for that help was a big deal, because my parents built into me through the abuse that reaching out for help was a very perilous thing. Like it was dangerous, because let's say I reach out for help and then I talk to a social worker at school and then they investigate, and then my mom goes to jail, my stepdad goes to jail, my brother and I go to foster care. I end up going, and all because I got help. And it was my responsibility and my fault that I did that. And that goes all the way back to the early on with that survivalist mentality of trying to escape from my father, of having to protect my mom. Like it just got built into me to, as toxic as the family is, it's all you have,
Mhm.
and do what you can to protect it. And so the reaching out for help, the thought of doing that, the first time I reached out to social services, that was like, okay, I'm pulling the trigger. They tried to help me a bunch of times and it was the worst thing ever. So I'm gonna do that. And it was, all they did was stick me right back into it. And that it after those two times, it became really hard for me to access any kind of therapy or any kind of any kind of assistance from anybody for decades afterwards, because it just removed that whole area as something that should be looked at. And it took a long time of personal work to even be able to access therapy on a one-to-one level until I came out with my story in adulthood. Honestly, it was just difficult to let those guards down and be able to access it again because of the toxic nature. I really feel that one of the biggest thing that that particular moment could have done from a therapeutic level that they could have done differently is separate me from my mom, interview me separate away from my mom, and have the two different interviews and not have it all at one table. Because at the table, I produced a bloody razor blade. I showed him my cuts in my arms. I told him what I was thinking about, and she was right there, able to refute everything, able to in real time cut me down and talk over it. And it was like not being able to give me any kind of space to talk about it. And I do have hope, though, for today's world that we were able to talk about it, because I'm able to talk about it now. Like the fact that I'm able to have a voice to talk about this kind of pain, and anyone even wants to listen about it, let alone identify, it shows that we've progressed greatly as a nation. Because when I was a little kid, abuse and domestic violence wasn't just ignored, it was ridiculed. Like and even on a mass social level. Like, you ever watch the show The Honeymooners? The TV show The Honeymooners back in the day, with the main tagline for the TV show The Honeymooners was "Bang Zoom Alice right in the kisser." Like, the main joke of the show is he's going to punch his wife in the face because she talks too much, and that's the punchline. That's what everybody laughs at. And so for us who have come so far as a country, I think shows great promise.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you were saying, I mean, I think that we forget that it takes a lot of energy, one, to just even ask for help. And then as a youth specifically, because, and the age that you really were in these places when you ultimately left home. I mean, that's like the age that everything is starting to shift and change, and all the hormones and everything is
Mm-hmm.
happening right at that moment. And now on top of that, you're homeless and you don't have a safe place to go, and asking for help seems like one thing that you need to do, and you're not able to get that help. And getting the gun was super easy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like that's the easy part, but also the when you say like how it broke you, like it completely just shattered everything. You're like, well, I'm not able to even be helped. So now I'm going to prove to you that I'm a
Yeah.
monster. And it doesn't even matter who I kill. Like, it wasn't about them, it was about making your parents live with what you did. And that is something that when you told me about your story, I was like, wow, like that is a way different perspective from how the media plays it out, and how anybody talking about this conversation, we don't talk about it from that perspective. And I think that's something that we absolutely need to start talking about.
Well, what I try to do is I try to put as human a face on it as possible, because I find that when we talk about these things, we get lost in jingoistic bumper stickers, or we try to make everything seem like it's a TV show. And the more that we can put our own face on it, or a human face, then the more that they'll see a face when they think about it. So like whenever I talk, if you notice when I talk, I avoid the two terms gun control and mental health, even though obviously that's what my story is about, is both those things. But I avoid the terms gun control and mental health specifically, except to say you should never say the terms gun control or mental health. Because if you say gun control, you get lost in the minutia of the details. You get lost in is that a bump stock? Is that a rifle? What kind of and the argument is you divert away from the entire purpose, which is you want to keep weapons that can kill a lot of people out of the hands of someone like I was 25 years ago. And mental health is the same thing on the other side. It's this big gray amorphous blob. It's It's what is mental health? It's this cloud. I can't wrap my hands around it. I can't really grasp it, but it's really personal. So I can't really dig and investigate. So it's just this big gray cloud of what is mental health. So instead of either one of them, I say, the dude with all the rifles with that owns the guns, I don't think you're the problem. I think that the one that if own what you want, man, that you're not the issue. The issue is keep things that can kill a lot of people out of the hands of someone like I was, who thinks they need to burn themselves apart to fit their world. That I'm not good enough, I need to blow up the world to fit it. That's what we need to care about. And mental health, if we just say we're going to focus on mental health problems, then you're just walking into the cloud. Put more of a face on it. I say I was depressed and abused and felt like I was worthless because I was told I was worthless a lot, and I adopted that as my own personality. Mm-hmm. And the more that you see that when you think about depression, the more that you'll see my story when you think about school shooters in the news, then maybe you'll see them as a kid screaming out in pain and not just the screaming itself. Because the other factor to think about when you're that kid who's reaching out for help, not only is it hard because you are taught early on that help can destroy your world, and it's hard because people will judge you early on when you walk in, you get stereotyped. But it's also hard because the only thing that you might be taught of how to express your emotions is with anger and aggression and lying. If your life, if the hell at home, and the only thing that you're exposed to constantly is abuse and lying and degradation and destruction, then how can you expect that kid to walk into a therapist's office and be polite and say polite things? And so that turns the therapy or reaching out for help at all into walking into a room full of spikes that are pointed inside. And so you never know what you might say that you're venting, and you're just expressing yourself the way that you do normally, because that's the vocabulary that you're taught early on. That's the only words you know of how to say your language of anger. And you say the one thing that's going to cause the therapist to have a mandatory report that's going to then blow up your entire world. So you just avoid the whole thing to begin with, because you don't know what you might say that could destroy your existence. Because they don't tell. They'll give lists to all the therapists for what the words are, what the phrases are to watch out for, and what everything is. They don't say any of that to the people looking for help. They just set those up as traps, basically. Like it's when and speaking, and not traps all the way, because I understand they have a reason. I understand that there's a purpose for it, and there's a legitimate reason why those lines are there. But I really feel that the adults have indemnified ourselves out of effectiveness. Like, we've put up so many restrictions and so many boundaries to make ourselves not responsible for what might potentially happen, that we have reduced any effectiveness for that therapy to be actively assessed. And that's one of the biggest things that I see law enforcement and schools and the places I go to present and talk to. The biggest hurdle they're having to overcome is to reconnect with the children, instead of just having all these policies they put in place to protect themselves from it. Like, how do I reconnect with the kid as a person, and how do I see the kid as a human again, instead of how do I harden the target, or how do I whatever the policy might be. Like, if you focus on the policy, regardless of what the policy might be and how effective the policy is, you are depersonalizing the kid who's screaming out in pain. Because the kid who's screaming out in pain, his whole world is that. When I was in the dark, everybody looked at me like I was either a monster or a project. I was either something you needed to be afraid of or something you could fix. And neither one of those is a person. And what Mike did was saw me as an equal. Mike, even though Mike was an entirely different social stratus than me, his parents were well off. He went to college. He had a whole different, very stable, very loving family. When we would sit and talk, he never once judged me because I was dirty and fat and smelly and screaming in pain sometimes. He saw the brain that loved comic books and loved stories and loved writing and loved history and loved, like, philosophy and that. So he saw the kid that was doing the screaming, and he didn't care about what the screaming was. He's like, yeah, I get that. You're fine. These are the words you can say also. And gave me a slightly different vocabulary of how to express my emotions. And I think that equalizing that vocabulary is, I think, the best thing that we could possibly do to increase effectiveness of therapy all the way across the board, to let the kids be able to express and let the people who are in therapy be able to receive that and not have it be so traumatic on both sides.
Yeah. No, and I think that's, I mean, one of the things that I teach in the classes that we do is non-judgmental listening. And that's a little bit about what you're talking about, because when we go into a situation with all of our background or our trauma or whatever our experience is, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then we take that into the situation when we're talking to somebody else, it creates new challenges. So, how can we be effective in the space of understanding and not be judgmental about it? And like you just said,
Mm-hmm.
have that conversation just on a regular level. It doesn't, you don't have to be a project. You don't have to, you don't need to fix me. Like, I'm not broken. Like, maybe I felt really
Yes.
broken at that moment, but I'm not
Mm-hmm.
broken as a human. And I look at that. So I think, I mean, with Colorado, how we have had multiple shootings, and more recently, it's hard for me to say, oh, it's all this kid's fault, right? Or it's all their parents' fault. Like, it's not
Mm-hmm.
anybody's fault. And I don't know why as a society we look to blame, or we feel like we need to blame something. Like,
I
why aren't
think
we having the other conversations?
I think it's because we as a group have decided that we're all the main characters in our own movie, and we
Mm,
don't realize that we're really all in an ensemble performance. Like that fundamentally is what it is. We all carry the sum total of human knowledge in our pocket. We all have the ability to take a picture and a selfie of ourselves and put it up on social media and get a whole bunch of likes from people we've never met before, and get social adulation in ways that we couldn't even conceive of 35 years ago. And that has made everybody the main character. But the thing is, none of us are the main character. We all are bit players in this movie together. And if we don't do this together, then we aren't going to continue forward. We have to be able to reach and I understand that the biggest problem is dealing with scale. When you're a therapist, you or a teacher or a doctor, you're dealing with this stuff at scale. You are dealing with a lot of people, a lot of problems, and a lot of time. And so I get asked, what can I do on the ground to actually give a result in the moment on the ground? How can I use this? The best thing I can say is break some tiny bits of protocol, little tiny bits, nothing that's going to break your procedure, just enough to humanize you to the person you're talking to. So like, oh, you like that band? I like that band. Let's listen to a song for that for a while. Or I like that food too. Let's talk about that for a bit. Let's do something on a human level, because I've seen from existence, from personal experience. You have therapist A, therapist B. Therapist A, it's all checklists, documents, procedures, journals. That turns into static and white noise, and it's not a human, and you check out entirely. You're done. Therapist B, oh, you like Nine Inch Nails? I like Nine Inch Nails. Listen to that for a while. After that, you get the same checklist, the same journal, the same procedure. Therapist A, you ignore. Therapist B, we literally invite to Christmas dinner. That's not just an allegory. That's what really happened in my life. Like, my kid has gone to therapists, and those are the two therapists that we've dealt with in our world. And the therapist B, we still talk to after 3 years of not having her in his life. So that it's possible to have the same structure that you need to deal with on a therapeutic level, but to approach it from a humanistic perspective and have that connection with the person to begin with. And equalizing communication is the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
And to
think,
give
oh, go ahead.
to I just want to say that the heart of it is to give love to the ones that you feel deserve it the least. The people that if you think that kid is on the edge and doesn't deserve the love, investigate that in yourself and think, why can't I give him more?
Yeah, that's so true. And I know, I mean, a lot of what I say too is advocate. And that's what I hear you saying is, and the same goes for me. After my sister passed, I was really in a dark place, but I just kept going. Like, that was my coping mechanism. And I hit this virtual wall. And ultimately, I went to a therapist, which, whatever, she did the job for the moment, wasn't
Mm-hmm.
somebody that I would have continued to see by any means. But it was what I needed for the moment. And then I found that real connection, right? Like, it was something that I had to advocate for myself, and I had to find a different community. I ended up finding
Mm-hmm.
a whole entire community that lifted me up versus dragged me down. And that's where the difference, like you said, with Mike and Amber, I mean, I know you are still friends with them today, which is
Mm-hmm.
incredible, but you had this common ground that's really what he was focused on. And of course, now Marvel, like, I mean, we are all fans in our family. Like, we love
Yep.
superheroes. My son now just actually went to Pokemon, so we're on that
Yep.
phase.
Yep.
But it's still, I mean, that was the thing or not back in the day.
It was.
It never, like when we talk about bullying, there's always something that somebody can pick
Hmm.
on somebody for, and if
the
it's cool or not.
the comic books from my age is whatever the current social contagion is for this age. Like it's just the anger du jour. It's not so much about the item itself. It's about the it's like you said, around that age, from 13 to 17, you're figuring out your personality, you're reaching the age of reason, you're figuring out that you are a you and that you can have likes and ideas yourself and what you're going to be, but you're also figuring out where your limits are and what your filter is. And we all know that teenagers are vicious. Teenagers will pick something to go after and attack. Teenagers as a group will form cliques, and those cliques will pick another clique to go after and attack. And the same thing that resolves that eventually as we grow up is the same phenomenon I talk about here. It's that eventually as we grow up, we realize that clique was just hanging together because we happen to like that couple things, but we didn't really have that much in common with that guy. But that dude over there in that other clique, I kind of like him more, and we kind of get along on a different personal level. So we can connect and have more of a human aspect. And as we grow older, that's the way it happens, because you don't see 30-year-old clique groups. You don't see it. You see people hanging out at a bar with their buddies from different areas and see various groups in their friend group. Because the older you get, the more you realize that those stereotypes that we put on box you in, and they limit your ability to actually see the whole person, both the positive and the negative. And the more you can see all of a person, the better off you'll be able to be all the way around. And I think that we forget as grown-ups that we went through that process, that we went through a process of connecting with humanity and figuring out that we are people and they are people too. And the more that we can do that again, because we hit that wall and then we disconnect as we get our own, we go into our own adult world, and then we figure out that, well, I have the solution for everything, and I built up all this structure for my life, and I must have all the solution for all of it. And so that's when main character syndrome really kicks in, that now I'm the main character, I have to pay all the bills, I have to do all the stuff, I'm the head of the family. And we forget that even as the main character, as the adult, we're still an ensemble. We're still part of this collective together. We're still part of society, whether we like the people we're with or we don't. And we have to move forward with that as a group. And give love to the ones that we feel deserve the least. Sometimes that's ourselves.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, like, as you become an adult and things change and you look back on your life as it was and then realize, like, all these transitions happen. I think the important part of what we're really talking about is how do we notice those kids that may be struggling or having these hard family dynamics, and how do we
Mm-hmm.
still accept them and honor what they're experiencing, versus, like you were saying, like demonizing people or showing that they're this monster or whatever you want to
Mm-hmm.
label them, right? But how do we start having these conversations? And I don't know, like, one thing that I talk about is it could potentially be one person that saves somebody's life
And
or
you never know.
changes the
If you ask
trajectory. Yeah.
if you ask Mike today what he did, he only says he just did what a friend does. He didn't think it was important. He didn't see it as a big day. Like it wasn't for me, it was a life-changing cathartic day that changed my entire existence and shifted my whole world. For him, it literally was just a Tuesday. It was just what he did for his life. And he didn't realize the magnitude of it until I came out later with my story. Like you never know. You never know what human connection you can do just by listening to that kid. Like you said, don't fix me, just exist with me.
Yeah.
Just be with me in this world. And together we can make it out. Like we can all make it through this together. And the more we can see that kid in pain as us, and then the more that we can realize that kid who's screaming out in pain is just as worthy as everybody else. And the more we can show him that he's worth it and that he matters, then we can try to break that image that he probably has in his head that I did, that I'm the monster and I'm worthless. What we need to not do is reaffirm that self-opinion.
Right.
We need to not tell them that, yeah, you're the monster and you're right, because you're the other, and so you're wrong, and so you're different than me, and so we need to attack you, and so you're on the other side of whatever I am, and so you need to be different, and so you need to be the wrong one. That is the path that we need to stop. We need to have more bipartisanship emotionally and interpersonally and just all the way around, because we're splitting on so many different levels, whether it is political or religious or it doesn't matter. It can be as simple as, I like that band, you like this band, and we can break apart. Sports team rivalries, like all these different things. And right now, as a society, we're really starting to break apart as a group. I really think that if we can identify the fact that that feeling that I had when I was at my absolute bottom, when I was about to blow up, when I was about to shoot up a school and burn my world down, isn't any different. It's not any different at all than the feeling that a model has when she's right before her photo shoot, when she's throwing up in a cup. That's not different. That it looks different. It looks like two different species, but it's the same animal. It's the same animal that is the gangbanger who's fitting into his clique, and so he's trying to be a criminal. It's the same animal that's the white collar criminal who's embezzling all the tons of money and blowing it all at the gambling. It's the same animal. It's, I'm not good enough in my world. I need to burn myself apart to fit it. And the more we can realize that, the more we can see just how bipartisan and human it really is, and that there's no difference between me and you, regardless of who you are.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you just literally like dropped the mic right there. And I absolutely would love to even continue this conversation, but unfortunately we can't. I do want to, this is a link. I know it's long, but it goes to Aaron's TEDx talk. So I'll leave it up for a minute. So if you want to go watch even further his story and his TEDx, where is the best place if people do want to reach out? Maybe they want to have you come in as a speaker, or they just want to
absolutely
talk. Where can they find you? Where the easiest place?
Well, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. My Facebook is just Aaron Stark. Twitter is at StarkDad1313. My LinkedIn, I'm also very active there. Come find me on LinkedIn. I'm also just signed with a recent speaking agency, so if anybody wants to have me come speak, look me up at APB Speakers. My speaking page just went live the other day. Or you can contact me directly, and we can work through that too. I'm just a regular guy. I work full time at a gas station and try to do all this activism just because I think I should. So thank you for having me on. And like I said, just guys, remember that kid in the dark, that's you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was amazing, and I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Holy moly. Amazing episode of Make Mental Health Matter. Again, make sure that you hit that subscribe button or follow wherever you're listening or watching so that you don't miss another episode. Because again, whether you're watching us on Monday at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time with Make Mental Health Matter, I don't even know. My brain's like, woo, that was an awesome conversation. But with Mental Health Mondays at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, and then also on Wednesdays, which we have Warrior Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So whichever one you watch, I promise you, the guests that I have are just incredible. And the whole point is to give you stories maybe you identify with. Maybe it's something that you had a question about. Maybe it's something that you're like, oh man, that resonates with me. That's the whole point to everything that I do, because the more education, the more resources, the more information that we can give to those that need it the most, that's really ultimately my goal. And so please make sure that you follow. Join us back next Monday at 11 a.m. and or next Wednesday at 7 p.m. for Make Mental Health Matter. And I will see you all next week. Bye, y'all.